people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that WBA Super Bantamweight Champion Erika Cruz of Mexico has been stripped of her WBA title following a positive doping test. A trip over to the WBA's website reveals that the WBA title at Super Bantamweight is registered as vacant, where initially Erika Cruz has been the reigning WBA champion for about 3 years and 7 fights, as of 2021, when she beat then-champion Jelena Marjanovic for the title.
This is standard.
Standard protocol. This was expected, that following that positive test result, she'd be stripped of the title, and now the number 1 and number 2 ranked fighters may end up fighting for it. Nazarena Romero and former champion Mayerlin Rivas, a rematch between them.
Because they fought before.
Back when Mayerlin Rivas was WBA champion. A rematch between them may now be ordered for what is the newly vacated title. Title's vacant. That has to mean that the WBA wasted no time moving on this.
They acted fast.
Unlike what the WBC likes to do in these situations, always playing devil's advocate and giving the fighter or the champion in this situation the benefit of the doubt, basically enabling such practices where the WBC might have been trying to sweep this under the rug and explain it away. It would appear that the WBA, their sister organization, they wasted no time.
What did she test positive for?
Winstrol, otherwise known as stanozol, an anabolic steroid that copies the way testosterone works. Winstrol can be abused to increase muscle mass, decrease fat, and improve physical performance. She tested positive for Winstrol after the Nazarena Romero fight, the fight that was scored a draw. Erika didn't win the fight, not on paper, but she didn't lose the title either. Thus, her reign was extended up until this happened, up until it came out that she tested positive for a banned substance. And I don't have any elaborate explanations or makeshift arguments to defend Erika Cruz like we see so many defending Ryan Garcia, who tested positive for a banned substance. He's got his own doping fiasco.
You notice that nobody's playing devil's advocate for Erika the way they're playing devil's advocate for Ryan.
You notice that nobody's playing devil's advocate for Julio Cesar Martinez the way they're playing devil's advocate for Ryan. That there are 2 or 3 doping cases going on, and nobody's going up to bat for them the way they're going up to bat for Ryan, likely because Ryan is more popular than they are, but popularity in and of itself doesn't make him innocent.
It just makes you gullible.
No, I don't think that Ryan Garcia is any more innocent than Julio is innocent, or Erika in this instance, in this situation. That substance didn't end up in your system by accident.
I'm sorry, I mistook this Winstrol for my agave.
These things don't just happen by accident. The frequency of situations just like this one involving male fighters, female fighters, contenders, and champions tells the story of a sport where doping is so widespread, you start to wonder if the whole damn sport isn't on something. That in previous eras of boxing where anti-doping testing wasn't normalized, fighters were free to use whatever they wanted, but it was in the Mayweather era.
There was anti-doping testing in spots, but it was rare.
Where you started to see a push for anti-doping testing in association with what eventually became the Manny Pacquiao fight, the Maypac fight. That was a hot topic, a hot button topic for a long time. And that push for anti-doping testing in that era is what led the way to where we are now, where anti-doping testing is more prevalent. And as a result of it being more prevalent, more fighters are getting caught than ever before.
Goes hand in hand. More testing means more positive test results.
More lofty explanations to try and explain away how it is these banned substances are ending up in the systems of so many fighters, male and female, contenders and champions.
These are all just accidents.
These are all just cases of contaminated supplements and what have you.
I remember when Hannah Gabriels tested positive for a banned substance, the excuse was it came from her dog. Her dog's on steroids? Somebody is.
That's the latest as it pertains to Erika Cruz. As a result of testing positive for Winstrol, she's been stripped of the WBA title, and now it's up for grabs. In men's super lightweight news, Kenny Sims reacted to Teofimo Lopez's performance this past weekend against Steve Clagett, and he said, "I would have been a world champion tonight if you was up for a challenge, but I see why you picked who you picked. Looks like you slipping a little bit, Teofimo, but I'm ready when you're ready."
Steve Clagett was a handpick.
According to Mike Kopinger, Teofimo was presented with Kenny Sims, Raymond Muratalla, Elvis Rodriguez, and Steve Clagett. And of the four, he chose Steve Clagett for obvious reasons. That Steve, unlike Jermaine Ortiz, who Teofimo fought before that, he's not going to spend the whole 36 minutes running from Teofimo Lopez. He's going to take it to him, come to him. That he's the kind of guy that Teofimo doesn't have to chase. So theoretically, he's a guy that Teofimo can look good against.
Did he look good, though?
Well, listen, he won the fight, and he won the fight decisively. Context is key. It's not like this was close or controversial.
Teofimo won the fight. He just didn't look spectacular doing it.
That's the context. That Teofimo fancies himself the best fighter in the world or one of the best fighters in the world. This is a guy who's calling out Terrence Crawford for a fight. But if you can't get the respect of a Steve Clagett.
And he didn't.
Steve Clagett was coming forward from the beginning of that fight to the end of that fight. And at no point did Teofimo knock him down or knock him out.
This is at 140. This is how you're doing with a guy like this at 140. So what on earth is it you think you can do with Terrence Crawford?
I saw veteran manager Rick Merrigan react to the fight by saying that this is just Teofimo fighting to the level of his opposition, that's what he does. He fights to the level of his opponent.
I am so sick of hearing that.
That same old cookie-cutter response that is intended to explain away a string of lackluster performances from Teofimo, that now it's starting to look like he's got more lackluster showings than good ones, that his biggest wins are the win over Loma and the win over Josh Taylor.
To a lesser extent, Richard Comey. He looked all right in the Richard Comey fight.
But he didn't look all right with George Kambosos. He didn't look all right with Sandor Martin. He didn't look all right with Jermaine Ortiz, and he looked average, bang average, with Steve Clagett this past weekend. So maybe we need to stop saying that, oh, well, he's just fighting to the level of his opponent. Maybe what it really is that he's not that good.
That doesn't mean he's bad.
That doesn't mean he never accomplished anything. That just means he's not that good.
Not as good as advertised.
Veteran boxing scribe Mike Kopinger asked, where does Teofimo Lopez go from here? A move to 147 could be next in September, with Brian Norman floated around as a possibility.
I talked about that fight.
My previous video, I talked about how Teofimo Lopez may have the right style for the job. The right style for a mid-range to inside combination puncher. The right style, but perhaps not the right size. Perhaps not the right durability or power. That if you can't get this guy's respect, like you couldn't get Steve's respect, when he lands, and he will.
It's going to be more damaging.
Because this is an even bigger guy at a higher weight, and he can punch. You see what he did to Giovanni Santillán.
What'd he do to Teofimo?
What the boxing fans often do is associate popularity with ability. They may not realize that a Brian Norman, that's a very risky fight for Teofimo, but because they're more familiar with Teofimo and what he did at 135, what he's been doing at 140.
It's a risky fight, man.
So according to Mike Kopinger, Teofimo Lopez had a choice. Kenny Sims, Elvis Rodriguez, Raymond Muratalla, and Steve Clagett. And of the four, he chose the low-hanging fruit, the least riskiest option. And in choosing that option, he still didn't look fantastic. He still didn't look all that good.
But he's going to choose to fight Brian Norman in September.
He's going to do that willingly. Well, let's see.
See if he does.
And how he adjusts, if he adjusts at all. In men's super middleweight news, veteran fighter Lionel Thompson said, "Now David Benavidez realizes I'm not a monster. I'm a monster at lower weights beating up on small guys, but when it comes to those big guys, I'm just another good fighter. I'm not a monster. Artur is a real monster, so I think he Benavidez is like, I'm gonna go back down to 168. I'm a monster at that weight. These big guys, these guys my size? No, I'm not an elite guy at this weight."
So I see it.
Gaslighting during the Vajdik fight, gaslighting on the judges' scorecards to try to convince you that that was a masterclass from David, that that was a dominant showing from him.
I told you it wasn't. And more people are coming out and echoing that sentiment, that if you look so good at 175, why would you want to go back down to 168? You've been there for so long already. That weight can't be getting any easier to make.
It's because of what Lionel said. It's because of what I said. That at least there, he can pretend to be a monster when he has a noticeable size advantage over most of the guys at the weight. That he's not really a monster, but he pretends to be by outsizing guys.
After the Vazdik fight, Samson Lukowicz said that their priority is still the Canelo Alvarez fight.
They have been given a 2-week extension from the World Boxing Council to decide where they want to campaign moving forward. Do they want to be interim champion at 168 or interim champion at 175?
Though it's looking more and more like they want to stay at 168.
The problem:
Puerto Rico's own Edgar Berlanga is likely next for Canelo Alvarez, not David Benavidez, says Eddie Hearns.
So if David is going back down to 168, what does he do while he waits?
If Edgar ends up being next and not him.
Canelo Alvarez's traditional date of fighting on Mexican Independence Day weekend in September is right around the corner, but an opponent has not been announced yet for the undisputed super middleweight champion. If Alvarez plans on fighting September 14th, an opponent must be named soon for the event to be properly promoted. For Alvarez's Mexican Independence Day weekend fight, Jermel Charlo last year, the fight was announced on June 30th. Should Alvarez fight in Vegas on September 14th, he would have to go ahead against the UFC's 306, which will take place at the Sphere.
You know what Dana White has been doing? Dana White realized that a good chunk of the money that gets poured into boxing in America is poured into it by Mexican-American fans. So now he's trying to galvanize those fans and those customers to watch MMA and not boxing.
UFC president and CEO Dana White is promising a blockbuster event that is going to be a fucking love letter to the Mexican people. Many are now wondering if Conor McGregor's return fight following his recent injury will be rescheduled to headline the Sphere on the date. Matchroom Boxing head Eddie Hearn has promoted 6 of Alvarez's last 9 fights, and he believes that Alvarez will next face Edgar Berlanga, the undefeated super middleweight contender he promotes. "I think he'll fight Berlanga next," Hearn told Boxing Scene on Saturday night in Phoenix following Jesse Rodriguez's knockout win against Gallo Estrada. When you look at the options, who else is there to fight? Alvarez has 2 mandatories. One is William Skull, who I'd never even heard of before in my life, with all due respect to him. I'm sure he's a good fighter. And the other is WBA mandatory Edgar Berlanga, who is a Puerto Rican knockout artist. He fought on ESPN and DAZN. Everybody knows him, and it's a competitive fight. So I think he'll fight Berlanga next. Vegas, New York, or whatever. If there's a Sphere fight, then maybe they'll want to do it in New York, but Canelo is a creature of habit. He likes Vegas.
Eddie didn't mention David Benavidez?
Canelo likes Vegas, but he also likes fighting in Texas. It's really down to DAZN. They had the broadcast last time when Alvarez fought Jaime Munguia. We didn't have to promote the fight. DAZN didn't have to put the guarantee up. They got the broadcast and it did extremely well. So they are quite happy doing that. Business is good for DAZN. They are doing amazing at the moment. The numbers are through the roof. We are in a really good position with the platform. You don't want to be over guaranteeing fighters, and that's my opinion. For fights and doing millions of dollars in the process on the guarantee, we've seen people do that before, and they left the business quickly. Berlanga said in May, days before Alvarez scored a unanimous decision against Munguia, that he expected to fight Alvarez in September.
What caught my attention is that Eddie Hearn said DAZN are the ones who put up Canelo Alvarez's guarantee, not the PBC and not Amazon.
Which begs the question, If Canelo Alvarez's guarantee didn't come from the PBC, didn't come from Al Heyman or Amazon, then what's the use of that relationship?
What's the point?
You know that Canelo Alvarez's last pay-per-view had more than one distributor. DAZN was one, Amazon was another. But if you're not actually getting anything from Amazon, then what's the use in having that hand in the cookie jar?
Al Heyman and the PBC, is that relationship even still active?
Especially if he ends up fighting a matchroom fighter in his next fight, and not a PBC fighter. Edgar Berlanga said in May, days before Alvarez scored a UD against Munguia, that he expected to fight him in September. I'm 100% confident. I know it's gonna happen, Berlanga said at the time. I'm Puerto Rican, I'm a superstar, I got a big backing and a big following. Yeah, I don't got a title, I'm his WBA mandatory, but you gotta understand, the fan base I've got is insane, and I know we're gonna do amazing numbers on pay-per-view, and it's gonna be one for the history books. It's Mexico versus Puerto Rico. It's big, so we're definitely gonna make some money.
The implications.
Recent reports seem to indicate that Canelo and William Skull, his IBF mandatory challenger, have agreed to a step-aside deal, so Canelo doesn't look to be fighting William next.
Is that to fight Edgar?
If it is to fight Edgar, that would in effect leave both David Benavidez, the PBC, and Al Heyman in the cold because Edgar is a matchroom fighter. And while Matchroom did not promote Canelo Alvarez's last fight,
they might promote this one because of Edgar. Edgar is their fighter.
In a situation like that, there wouldn't be much reason to involve Al Heyman, his PBC, Amazon Prime as a platform. For what?
It's just another hand in a cookie jar.
And if Canelo Alvarez ends up fighting Edgar and not, say, David Benavidez, well, that caps off his year. I mean, mostly. So what does David do?
Sit out the rest of the year?
So I get the sense that David and his team would prefer to stay at 168, but that would only be for a Canelo Alvarez fight. The only reason they would stay there is to keep pursuing that fight.
But if it's not that fight, do you think that David wants to keep boiling down to super middleweight, to 168?
What are you saying?
That he might sit out the rest of the year? That he's going to stay at 168, he is, waiting for Canelo, but he's not going to force himself to make that weight for anybody else. And if he's not fighting Canelo in September, he may not fight at all for what remains of the year.
It wouldn't be the first time that David Benavidez kept a schedule like that. I remember the year that he fought David Lemieux. That was the only fight that he had that entire year. He sat the rest of it out. He might sit the rest of this one out.
That if he does stay at 168, if he does, it's for Canelo.
But if Canelo is fighting Edgar and not David, I don't think David's gonna put his body through that.
I think it's the way that Lionel Thompson said.
David knows that 175 pounds is a much easier weight to make, but at 175 pounds, you're not a monster. You're not a monster to those light heavyweights. You're only a monster at 168. 168, however, is not as easy to make, but the only reason you would make it is for Canelo.
That's it.
I'm not a fan of the Edgar Berlanga fight. I would actually prefer to see Canelo fight David and not Edgar.
But I ain't got no say in the matter. I ain't got no control over that situation.
It's not up to me. If it were up to me, he'd be fighting David next. And I think he beats David. I really do. Perhaps somewhere in Canelo Alvarez's mind, he wants to make him wait, wants to make him suffer, wants to dangle that carrot in front of him, let the desperation grow, build.
Perhaps.
It's why it's unwise to base so much of your own career and your own movements on someone else, as that breeds instability. You could always proceed as a light heavyweight, further acclimate to that weight, get used to it.
You could, but if you want to move back down to 168, it's your funeral.